Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to talk about a statement that has come out from the actor who played Cyborg in the Justice League film, Ray Fisher. Um, and he is basically coming out and saying that he wants to retract uh, the a statement that he made at San Diego Comic-Con in 2017, saying that basically that he was in full support of Joss Whedon coming in to finish Justice League, and the studio's choice, and that Zack Snyder was the one to personally pick Whedon, which we know was not the case. We know that the studio wound up doing that, but he basically says that he wishes to retract that statement forcefully. He also made sure to include that into it as well. And this is something that I think a lot of people need to understand about how film and press stuff works when the press junket for a film is going on. And I think some people realize this and some people don't. Some people take, when you see an actor in an interview, for instance, that actor cannot say certain things about the movie. Now, I think everybody kind of knows that. It's like, you don't go to a press junket for a movie you're in and then say the movie sucks. That very rarely happens. And when it does, that's a huge amount of creative difference between the director and the studio. Um, and even when it comes to actors or anything like that, I know Josh Trank did something similar for Fantastic Four when that was coming out. We know about the production hell that was now. But in this scenario, this is different because this was the reshoots that happened after Zack Snyder was removed from the project. I will keep referring to him as being removed from the project because I believe that Warner Brothers removed him and used his daughter's suicide as an excuse to remove him from the project. And after he was removed, Joss Whedon was brought on to finish the film. Now, the difference here is that when you have somebody who's in an interview, a regular actor, like I said, everybody thinks about that idea like, okay, they can't spoil the movie or anything like that, and they can't talk bad about the movie. At the same time, you can't talk bad about the studio, no matter what studio that is that makes that film. During that press junket, generally, you don't want to bash the studio that's backing your movie, because that's generally not a good idea. Now, there have been people that have kind of gone back and forth. There's actually been some statements recently from Anthony Mackie that I thought were pretty interesting, but about Disney's production in terms of the Marvel films. But looking at this scenario, it was very obvious that it was a piece of press, and it was very obvious when he spoke it that it was something that it was something that he was paid to say. It was something that he was paid to say so that people would go and watch the movie and not be concerned that Zack Snyder had been replaced. And all of the other actors pretty much said the same thing. Now, the thing with a non-disclosure agreement, and I'm just going to refer to it as an NDA because that's what most people refer to it as. The thing with an NDA is an NDA can include a lot of things. You can't say this, you can't say that, you can't say this, you can't say that. You can't bash the studio, you can't bash the movie, you can't bash any of the other actors. There's famous things with certain press junkets, especially with Marvel, actually, where it was kind of funny. They basically sent Don Cheadle to make sure that guys like Tom Holland didn't spurt out spoilers, because I guess he had a nasty habit of doing that at one point, which kind of got internet famous, I guess. Him and also Mark Ruffalo too, but I don't really blame Mark for that. He had a brain tumor. But the whole point is that they put Don Cheadle in there because Don Cheadle's a veteran actor. He's not one of these young kids, and he's not somebody who is kind of all over the place like Mark Ruffalo is. And he can keep those guys in line. So that's why they stuck him in those interviews. Same thing where they stuck Chris Hemsworth and Don Cheadle with Brie Larson in some of the Endgame stuff, because Chris Hemsworth is very likable. He does very well in those types of situations. Brie Larson is the polar opposite of that. She's almost toxic in some of those situations, depending on who she's being interviewed by and what they're asking. Don Cheadle, on the other hand, is kind of the law enforcement guy. He's the deadline guy. So if she starts getting pissed, he can intervene, and then Hemsworth can carry a majority of the interview. So it makes more sense to do it that way. And again, these things are cut down anyway. It doesn't really matter all that much if there's kind of a moment in there, because they'll just cut that out because they don't want to go on a bad rapport with the studio, whoever's doing the interview. Otherwise, they won't get more interviews. So going forward from that, now you have this situation where Ray Fisher is retracting this statement. So the reason why he's probably doing this, I would imagine that the original NDA that was available for Justice League at the time was either lifted or expired at some point. Because here's the thing: is that if you violate an NDA, the studio has a right to terminate you in certain scenarios. Like there's reasons why NDAs are signed. It's a contractual thing. You have to abide by it if you want to get paid and if you want to keep getting work afterwards. So if you have an actor that repeatedly violates NDAs with a studio, then that actor is not going to be hired on for very high profile projects. You can't have a guy who comes out and screams the end of your movie in somebody in an interviewer's face and then expect that guy to get another film deal immediately after that. So it does make sense, but with this scenario, I have a funny feeling that basically Warner Brothers gave the green light to bash anything involving that original Justice League that doesn't have to do with the Snyder Cut, and Joss Whedon does not have to do with the Snyder Cut. So Joss Whedon is now fair game because that part of the NDA was lifted. I would assume so. I would assume either the NDA was recontextualized and resubmitted and eventually re-signed by all the actors, or they just drew up an entirely new one. Either way, Joss Whedon was not included in that, which means they can rip him apart if they want to, which I think would be hilarious. Now, as far as Joss Whedon goes as a person, he seems like he's a scuzzy little weirdo. But I do like some of the things he's made. I like the first Avengers movie. The second one is serviceable. I wouldn't say it's anywhere near as good as the first one. And Serenity is or not Serenity. Firefly is the movie was Serenity, but Firefly was an interesting show, which I liked. But the thing is that a majority of his content is basically that Whedon-esque humor, that kind of smart ass, really quick back and forth type of humor. It's almost like watching Dennis Miller argue with himself. I guess if that would be kind of an equivalent of what that visual is, because it feels like that they're using. Sometimes they'll use terms that are just kind of like out there or insane. There's like weird inside jokes in the Avengers where there's a point where Robert Downey. No, sorry, that's Age of Ultron, where Robert Downey Jr. says something about reenacting Permanata or something, which I guess turns out to be some kind of weird like ancient ritual or something like that, or a prima nota. That's what it was. And it was just something that I don't think a lot of people were going to get, but it was an inside joke for Whedon, which is why he threw it in there. And I think that it's interesting when you see a director like that who's such a narcissist that he puts in jokes in his films that only he is actually going to get, and nobody else will understand unless they look up the term on Google. I think you've reached a point of narcissism there where you might want to take a step or two back. But that's the thing with NDAs, though, is that an NDA can be extremely specific or it can be very broad, depending on the wording. Again, it's more of a legal thing in that scenario, but it goes back to the actors in question. Now, the thing that we have to remember in Hollywood is that actors are not people that you necessarily should automatically put up on a pedestal. I would say the same thing about sports stars. Is the idea that they're not necessarily good people. They are talented people, and they are very talented at something, but that does not make them good. What makes them good is the quality of their actions. If you see, for instance, if you're going for the sports player analogy, if you see a sports player that oftentimes donates to charity events and supports their local community and is really nice and welcoming to fans, chances are that guy's probably kind of a good dude. If you see a guy that flips off the fans and like charges them $50 for an autograph because he doesn't like to talk to people, he's probably an asshole. So looking at actors, you can kind of apply the same projects for every person that you see in Hollywood that's a nice guy, like a Hugh Jackman or a Keanu Reeves. Again, from all accounts, I don't know either of them personally. You have some people like Joss Whedon, who's just a narcissistic little troll that likes to make horrible, crappy humor that gets old after a couple of years. Or you could list any number of horrible scumbags from Hollywood. You could go with people like Bryan Singer, or you could go with other people like Roman Polanski, or people in that vein. If you really wanted to go into acting, I guess you could bring up people like Kevin Spacey, or for with all the stuff that's being said right now, why not bring up Harvey Weinstein on top of it too? Because you have a plethora of scumbags in Hollywood. Although many of them are, some of them are not in front of the camera. I only did give one actor there as an explanation, but there are others. But the point is that just because we are in, these people are paid to play a role. They are paid to play somebody other than themselves. So when you see them on screen, a lot of the times you are not seeing the real them, and I think people lose that a little bit with the idea that they romanticize a character and believe that the actor that's playing that character is that character. It's kind of like almost a mental form of typecasting. But looking at this, you can see that when you actually watch all of the the footage and stuff from the Comic Cons and various other kind of media outlets that have happened over the years, you can, if you actually look at the actors and try and gauge stuff, you can tell when they're not being necessarily genuine with what they're saying, whether it's the way they're pronouncing it or the way they're wording it, that doesn't sound natural to their own speech in some ways. It's chances are they're only saying it because of an NDA. And chances are they're only saying a lot of things because of the NDA. And I think that after the fact, when you see NDAs lifted and you see actors just like rip apart films that they were a part of because they hated the film or they hated the people in it or they had horrible issues with the studio, any and all of those possibilities could have happened on any movie production with any actor, director, extra, set person, whatever. Because a movie production is I've heard it described as controlled chaos, but I've also heard it described as other things. But looking at that, it's an entire environment where you're in contact with literally hundreds of people. You're going to find people you don't like, and you're going to find reasons that maybe you don't like that movie. Maybe you just find a plethora of people that you really don't like that happen to be working on or with the film. So it doesn't surprise me that stuff like this comes out. I think it's actually a lot more common than what it's made out to be. When it a lot of media articles push this that, oh, look, this actor is bashing this movie. This is shocking, or they're bashing this movie that they were in. Oh, look, this is so shocking. It's like, it's probably not shocking in the sense that those thoughts have probably been going through many actors' heads over periods of time in history. I think that if you were to go up to any actor, regardless of NDAs, and talk to them in private, I think you could probably get them to say at least one movie that in their filmography that was just a living hell to make, and they can't talk about it because the NDA is still in effect. That's the other thing, is the NDA is sometimes, I don't know the general jurisdiction in terms of a time frame. It's usually, I think, in terms of a time frame, like while the film is theatrically making money and also when it's making money on home release. So I would imagine it's somewhere in the 3 to 5 year mark. But I don't know that. I'm not a legal expert. But NDAs in general, you can kind of you can look at this and you can say, okay, he hated this from the beginning, and you can tell now that he hated it from the beginning, because he deliberately went after somebody now that he could. So it makes sense for Ray Fisher to now kind of bash this a little bit over Joss Whedon's head, because he's probably been waiting to do it since 2017, and people have been wanting to know what he had to think, because he was one of the characters in that movie that a lot of people liked. I personally liked him in the movie, and it was unfortunate that I think that his character didn't get as much time and respect as he deserved as he would have gotten in a 3-hour Snyder Cut version. But that's the thing, is like I don't want to overanalyze this too much. I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of an explanation about NDAs and kind of how that stuff works in involving like a film's press junket, and how press junkets themselves kind of work in terms of balancing out the interviews if they have to have multiple people in there for various reasons. But I want to know what you think. Do you think that Ray Fisher is right to call out Whedon at this point? Do you think that the reason why he didn't in the past was probably because of an NDA? Do you think that the Snyder Cut is going to be kind of a cleanser, I guess, for certain people? And do you think that this is going to open some doors? Put your thoughts in the comments below. As usual, I like to look and read them. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?